Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. Rich countries with less than 20% of the world's population have more than 50% of the world's vaccines. In some cases, these countries have hoarded millions of shots that they won't even use. We've been reporting on this for months now. We've also told you how the pandemic will not be over till this disparity is overcome. We've advocated patent waivers on the show because the demand is high and the supply is limited. It is important to ramp up capacity. It is important to get more companies to produce vaccines. The biggest roadblock in this path is patents. India and South Africa push for waivers. It took months for other countries and governments to come on board. There are still naysayers like the European Union. And the biggest impediment in this mission is Big Pharma. Big companies that produce vaccines. Tonight on Gravitas, we bring you the findings of a new investigation that shows how these companies, pharmaceutical companies, are lobbying hard to block patent waivers. The tricks and tools that they have employed to force the hand of governments the world over. Also on the show tonight, the rocket fire continues between Israeli forces and Hamas as international efforts to broker peace make no progress. We'll bring you the latest. Did you know that the Pentagon, the US Department of Defense, has a secret army? Apparently 60,000 men and women deployed all over the world. Does the US acknowledge it? Is it even legal? We'll bring you a special report. First, the Chabahar Railway project. And now the Farzad B gas field. As India loses another major project, we discuss India's missteps in Iran. And do you remember the Charlie Bit Me video? It's been viewed 880 million times and counting. It is now set to be auctioned as an NFT. What's that? We'll tell you in a report. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The Indian Coast Guard helps mooring two oil tanker ships that went adrift near Mumbai coast amid bad weather due to cyclone Tauftai. All 137 crew rescued from the barge Gal Constructor, which had gone adrift. The U.S. Supreme Court to reconsider the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling that legalized abortion nationwide. A rollback of abortion rights would mean a reversal of nearly 50 years of rulings. Judges will deliberate on whether states can ban abortions before a fetus can survive outside the womb, a long-standing goal among religious conservatives in the United States. Spanish Interior Minister Fernando Grande Marlaska says Spain has sent back 2,700 migrants that arrived illegally in the last few days, even as EU urges Morocco to block migrant crossings after thousands of migrants swam into northern African enclave of Ceuta. Argentina has ordered Facebook to suspend its data use policy, allowing it to collect information from users of its WhatsApp messaging app, the government announced on Monday. The suspension will last at least 6 months and aims to prevent the abuse of a dominant position. The European Union's drugs regulator has said the Pfizer COVID vaccine can now be stored at fridge temperature for much longer than it previously recommended. The European Medicines Agency says that once thawed, unopened vials can now be stored in a fridge for up to a month, up from the current 5-day limit. News agency Reuters reports that more than 15,000 refugees from Myanmar have fled and sought shelter in India. The report states that about 6,000 people from Myanmar are in Indian border state Mizoram's capital of Aizawl, with others scattered in 5 districts. A 2-month-old Spanish girl was saved by pioneering surgery when doctors transplanted a small heart that had stopped beating from a donor with a different blood type. The case opens the way to saving more infants who need heart transplants and are too young to use ventricular support devices until they get a compatible donor. Cricket Australia has confirmed there will be no further probe into the infamous ball tampering scandal from 2018. Batsman Cameron Bancroft had hinted in an interview last week that the bowlers were aware of the plan to tamper with the ball, but he has informed the board that he has no new information to share. The bowlers who played that match have also issued a joint statement, restating their innocence and slamming former Australian players who have questioned their integrity. England captain Harry Kane has reportedly informed Tottenham Hotspur that he wants to leave the club at the end of the season. The 27-year-old has recently spoken of a desire to win trophies, which Spurs haven't managed to do since 2008. Kane is one of the most prolific strikers in the Premier League history and likely to command a big transfer fee in the region of £150 million. However, he still has 3 years left on his current contract.
It's a day of grim milestones in India. India has reported its highest number of deaths in a day. The total pandemic caseload has crossed 25 million. It's the second highest in the world. But new cases continue to fall. In the last 24 hours, more than 260,000 new cases were reported. As many as 199 districts in India are reporting a dip in cases, but in states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, new infections are steadily rising. The active cases are falling, though. They've dropped by more than 150,000 in one day. India now has more than 3.3 million active cases. Some good news on the recoveries front, too. More than 400,000 people were discharged on Monday. 4 lakh people, the highest that India has reported so far. But the fatalities are not falling. More than 4,300 people died yesterday, the highest that India has ever reported. Last week we told you about plasma therapy, how it doesn't work, how there was overwhelming scientific evidence against it, how indiscriminate use of plasma can lead to more dangerous mutations. 18 health experts wrote a letter to India's principal scientific advisor. India's own study, conducted about 8 months back, found no benefits of plasma therapy. But India was still using it, doctors were still prescribing it, and people were running from pillar to post to procure plasma for loved ones. We argued that India's top scientific body, the ICMR, should review these guidelines. They should stop prescribing plasma as a treatment. And our story resonated with many of you. We heard from doctors and laypersons across the country. And last night, India dropped plasma therapy from its treatment protocol. The decision was taken by India's National Task Force. This task force has officials from ICMR, that is the Indian Council of Medical Research, and AIIMS, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Some positive news on the vaccine front as well. As the world struggles with shortages, the United States has finally decided to share some vaccines from its large stockpile. Now remember, the US has been hoarding vaccines. Amid mounting global pressure, President Joe Biden has relented. His country will now share 80 million doses, 80 million. The earlier commitment was 60 million shots of AstraZeneca. Now, it's a vaccine that hasn't even been approved in the US. They're not using these shots, but they have 60 million of them. Now, Washington has locked up a stockpile of these shots. They are now set to release it. The US says it will also share another 20 million doses. These are vaccines from Pfizer, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, and it's still not clear where these vaccines will go. So America seems to have woken up. It wants to share vaccines. It also wants to waive patents. After hoarding for months, it wants to play the good guy, look like a global leader in fighting the pandemic. Whether it's doing a good job of it is a story for another time. Tonight, I want to tell you about what Big Pharma has been up to. Remember when the US announced support for patent waivers, pharma lobbyists, both in America and Europe, issued statements and they slammed the move. And we don't need to tell you why they did this. Big Pharma wants to keep the patents locked. They do not want to share the vaccine recipes. And they did not just stop with those statements. Pharma companies are actively lobbying. They're trying to stop governments from waiving patents, both in America and Europe. They have gone into an overdrive. We'll start with what's happening in the US. An investigative website has accessed some confidential exchanges. These are between pharma lobbyists and lawmakers. And they show what we've been talking about. Big Pharma is trying everything to stop patent waivers. They're supplying lawmakers with talking points. They're drumming up opposition. They're building pressure on the government. They're even collecting signatures from lawmakers to get Joe Biden to reverse his policy. What you see on your screen now is an unreleased letter. It's a letter written on the letterhead of the US Congress. It is addressed to the US President. Now, ideally, a letter like this should be distributed by a lawmaker. It is done when they're trying to galvanize support for a policy or some decision. But this one, the one that you see, is being shared by Big Pharma with friendly American lawmakers. Reports say a lobbyist representing major companies like Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca sent out this letter in an email. He asked for signatures of support from some lawmakers. So what does the letter say? It is drafted like a warning to President Joe Biden. It says that sharing vaccine know-how will cost American jobs. It will allow China to profit from American innovation. The report says this letter already has 29 signatures. So do you see what's happening here? Vaccine research was funded by taxpayers' money. But now that vaccines are selling big, these pharma companies want to own them. They're building pressure on the government to not share the vaccine formulas. They're manipulating the narrative. Look at this list. It's a list of the talking points that America's pharma lobby is distributing. It labels a waiver a national security threat. A patent waiver is a national security threat, it says. This document argues that a waiver will empower Russia. It will allow China, and I'm quoting, it will allow China to gobble up vaccine supplies and technology. Even India figures in this campaign by Big Pharma. Remember, India was one of the first countries to push for a waiver at the World Trade Organization. So these lobbyists have dedicated an entire document to India. And this one talks about the aid that pharma majors had voluntarily shared with India during the second wave. It's a 3-page long document. It details the donations by different companies, the donations that came to India. Now, usually lobbyists use papers like these to guide lawmakers, to influence policy. But with these papers, pharma companies are trying to tell lawmakers that they voluntarily stepped up support to India when India needed help. And in return for this, they want the government to not touch their patents. Such influence campaigns are not limited to America. They've been launched in the European Union as well. And here Big Pharma has the ear of top European lawmakers. These are officials who are supposed to guide Europe's pandemic response. They're supposed to decide how Europe will approach the waiver at the World Trade Organization. A watchdog recently released data and numbers on the meetings of European commissioners. Who are European commissioners meeting and what are they meeting for? This is what the watchdog found. The top decision makers in Europe are trapped in an echo chamber of Big Pharma. From March 2020 to May 2021, European commissioners have met with pharmaceutical lobbyists 140 times. In contrast, they met producers of generic drugs 18 times and advocates of patent waivers hardly. NGOs that support the cause of patent waivers have got just one high-level meeting in 14 months. Do you see the gap here? Decision makers are only engaging with lobbyists. And we're talking about the top guys, the elected officials, the likes of the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and her core team, the European Union's Health Commissioner, the Commissioners for Trade, International Partnerships, and the Single Market. Even major medical humanitarian organizations cannot get through to them. Here's one example, Doctors Without Borders. They wrote to the European Vice President for Trade and the Commissioner for Health. They reached out twice. In a statement to WION, Doctors Without Borders have confirmed that their requests for a meeting have been denied. Now, what does all of this tell you? The leadership, the men and women who are supposed to discuss patent waivers, are only listening to Big Pharma, only talking to lobbyists. They don't even engage with the other side. The result is this: the European Union is the biggest roadblock before vaccine patent waivers. The bloc is holding back India's proposal at the World Trade Organization. So this is what it boils down to. In America, pharma lobbyists are enlisting lawmakers to put pressure on the government. In Europe, they're dictating lawmakers. The aim is clear: blocking patent waivers and killing negotiations even before they begin. And now to a story that we have been tracking. They say, truth is the first casualty in war, and this phrase has never made more sense than it does now. In the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict, the gap between truth and falsehoods is growing wider by the day. And a lot of credit for this goes to social media, where misinformation is flourishing. Fake videos and images are going viral, and tonight we'll call out these falsehoods and tell you how they are fueling the conflict. Let's begin with a video. This video that you see. It shows a truck-based missile launcher moving down a civilian area. This video was first shared by a US-based pro-Israeli account. It has since been shared repeatedly with the claim that this is from Gaza and that Hamas is using humans as a shield against Israel. Let me tell you something. This video is fake. It is not from Gaza. It is from northern Israel. And it was shared in November 2018 by an Israeli news agency. What you see here are Israeli trucks. They got lost on their way and they entered a village. The account that posted this video has taken it down, saying, and I'm quoting, "Please accept my apology for the bad info." Here's case number 2. And this one's an image. It claims to show Israelis celebrating as a fire rages at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is being shared widely by pro-Palestinian accounts. They say Jews harmed their mosque and they danced as it burned. Again, this image is misleading. The mosque was never burned. It was a tree that caught fire. This was due to fireworks during Jerusalem Day celebrations, and it's from the 10th of May. Last we checked, both the image and the video were still being widely shared on social media, even in India, notwithstanding the fact that this is misinformation, and these lies could prove to be potentially deadly for both Israelis and Palestinians. As it is, the conflict is far from over. The skies are still burning on both sides. The death toll is rising. Between the 10th and the 17th of May, a total of 12 people died in Israel. 10 were killed in missile attacks and 2 in civil unrest. And this includes 1 child, plus 796 people who've been injured. During the same period, at least 212 people have died in Palestine, including 61 children and 34 women, 3 of them pregnant. The injuries stand at 6,000 plus. And this is the toll of just 6 days of conflict. What's worse, it comes in the middle of a pandemic. Gaza has only 1 laboratory to test Wuhan virus cases, and the health ministry there now says that it has been destroyed by an airstrike. They have no way of testing cases. In Israel, 2 foreign workers from Thailand have been killed in rockets fired from Gaza. Israel claims to have destroyed a rocket launching site used by the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And Hamas claims to have struck Israel's Urim military base, vowing to strike more military facilities. And amid this back and forth, both sides are failing to justify their actions. Take Israel's strike on the media complex, for example, the media complex in Gaza. Last Saturday, Israel struck a building that housed two major media organizations, the Associated Press, or AP, and Al Jazeera. Now, both their offices were destroyed in an airstrike, and Israel said that Hamas was using this building for its operations. It promised to provide evidence for this. It's been 3 days. And America, where the Associated Press is based out of, says that Israel has not provided any such evidence. The U.S. Secretary of State himself issued a statement categorically stating that he has not seen any information on this.
I will leave it to others to characterize if any information has been shared and our assessment of that information. The broader point, though, remains, and this is really critical. Israel has a special responsibility to protect civilians in the course of its self-defense, and that most certainly includes journalists.
Mr. Secretary, if I could follow up, you said that you've requested additional information. Mm-hmm. Have you received it? Have you seen it? And did you find it credible?
I've not seen any information provided, and again, to the extent that it is based on intelligence, that would have been shared with other colleagues, and I'll leave that to them to assess.
Do you notice a shift? America is openly demanding evidence from Israel. America is also, by the way, blocking a UN statement on the conflict, calling for a ceasefire. They're blocking that statement. The Israeli media says it's because the statement failed to condemn Hamas. Washington says it's because a ceasefire ultimately depends on the two parties involved, statement or no statement. We might never really know what the truth is. In the meantime, reports say that the ongoing clashes have led to a rise in anti-Semitism. The UK's Community Security Trust, a charity which looks after the safety of Jews in England, has said that there has been a 5-fold increase in reports of anti-Semitic incidents in recent days. According to them, at least 86 anti-Semitic incidents were reported in the UK between the 8th and the 17th of this month. Here's one such incident. Take a look. Here's another one. A Pakistan-based freelance writer working for the CNN put out this tweet on Sunday. The world today needs a Hitler, a brazen display of hatred towards Jews. Last we checked, the company in question had cut all ties with this person. Meanwhile, the international leadership remains divided on what to do with this region. The starkest division is being seen in the Arab world. It's an embarrassing time for all of them. Many Arab nations, remember, are walking a diplomatic tightrope, especially countries like Morocco, the Sudan and Bahrain. They'd recently normalized ties with Israel, and now they have condemned the clashes. But they've said very little about the situation in Gaza. Then we have countries like Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia, the Maldives and Iran. They have vociferously accused Israel of terrorizing Palestinians. But is anybody working on a solution? Well, some of them are. Like Egypt and France, the president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, along with the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, discussed mediating a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. Reports say both countries also intend to seek the support of Jordan. Listen to this.
For me, it is part of the process of achieving a ceasefire as quickly as possible, which is obviously what we want, and the construction of a possible path for discussions between the various parties involved. In this respect, we have decided to have a discussion in the next few days with President Sisi and the King of Jordan to try to see together how we can make concrete proposals on this path.
Now, it may still take a while for the mediation process to begin, and then some. Until then, as we watch these developments, it's imperative that we do not feed the hostility with misinformation and provocative fake news. Follow trusted sources. And now most of you tracking this conflict in West Asia must have also noticed one thing. Videos of rockets raining on Israel or images of Israel's Iron Dome intercepting rockets from Gaza. They're almost always accompanied by blaring sirens in the background. Where do you think the sound comes from? Where do you think these alarms are placed? Israel, you see, has an air raid siren system. Alarms go off every time a rocket from Gaza is fired towards Israel, and such alarms are placed across the country. Some go off automatically, some are manually controlled. Every time an Israeli hears a siren, he or she is expected to follow certain protocols, which includes rushing to safe rooms and bomb shelters. Our next report has all the details.
How do you live with a wailing alarm? How do you sleep, work, study or shower when you are kept on your toes by blaring sirens? This is Israel. It is currently fighting Gaza. Israel is bombarding the Gaza Strip. And Hamas is raining rockets into Israel. Every time a rocket directed towards Israel is fired, a siren automatically goes off in settlements near the Gaza Strip. For Israeli cities and towns further away, the alarm is manually turned on when deemed necessary by the IDF, or Israeli Defense Forces. Israel's air sirens are unusual, but not unique. Most towns the world over had similar air raid sirens during World War II. These alarms warned of approaching enemy bombers. In fact, it was the British who introduced the alarm system in this region. It was then called Palestine and was under British rule. Post 1948, the alarm system was expanded by the newborn state of Israel. The alarms meaning alarm. When an Israeli hears a siren, he or she has a minute to rush to a mamad or safe room. The siren goes off after the incoming rocket is intercepted, but residents are expected to stay in safe rooms for another couple of minutes. This is to avoid being hit by falling shrapnels. After the window period lapses, they can get back to what they were doing. What if an alarm goes off when an Israeli citizen is outdoors? He or she must run to a nearby building. If that's not an option, then lie down on the ground and cover their heads with their hands. If the siren goes off when driving, Israelis are expected to pull over, leave the car and rush to a shelter. When a train's pilot hears a siren, the train slows down to 30 miles per hour, and passengers are expected to bend their head and cover it with their hands. Today, Israel uses a multi-touch point siren system. The warning is simultaneously broadcast over TV, the radio, and apps. Mobile applications provide real-time alerts and information about the nature and location of the siren. Our correspondent in Israel ran us through one such app while taking refuge in a safe room following a siren.
I was privileged to be in a building that had a shelter, but a number of buildings in Israel don't have their own shelters or have communal ones where people have to go down a number of flights of stairs. When a siren goes off, you're not allowed to go into a lift.
Today, safe rooms are mandatory in every building in Israel. But in Gaza, there is no such rule. There's nowhere people can run. There are also no air raid sirens or safe houses. Gaza is tiny, just 365 kilometers square, with 2 million people. This strip is one of the world's most densely populated, and every time a bomb drops on Gaza, it risks every soul living there. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
So what's the way out of this conflict? The cycle of war and murder that has gone on for more than 70 years. Experts often talk about the two-state solution. It's something that India supports, as do many others. What is the two-state solution? In simple words, the creation of two states, one for the Jews, called Israel, and one for the Arabs, called Palestine. The two-state solution was first pitched back in 1937, and on paper it looks simple enough. But in reality, it is not. Historians call it the most intractable conflict in the world. What do the people say? This is what a Gallup poll found in 2013. 70% Palestinians in the West Bank support the two-state theory, 48% in Gaza, 52% in Israel. So the people are willing to live as neighbors. Then why is the promise of Palestine still unfulfilled? To understand this, we must look at the politics of Palestine, both domestic and international. Who speaks for the Palestinian community? Who is their leader? And why are Arab states suddenly wary of supporting their cause? Let's talk about the Arab states first. Until now, choosing between Israel and Palestine was easy for them. They always backed Palestine. But this time, it's not so simple. Israel is now a recognized partner of the Arab world. Last year, 4 countries normalized ties with Israel: the UAE, the Sudan, Bahrain and Morocco. Others were reportedly going to follow suit. So what do these countries do now? They make vague statements of support for Palestine, watch the conflict closely, but try not to engage in it. Palestine is on the back burner because the Arab world has bigger priorities now. They see Israel as a strategic partner, as a market with immense potential, as an ally against Iran, against Turkey and the Muslim Brotherhood. But don't get me wrong, the Arab people still support Palestine. They're flooding social media with hashtags. They're marching on the streets. The only difference is that their leaders do not share this enthusiasm anymore. Their condemnation of Israel is more out of compulsion than concern, and it's been like that for a while. That is the regional politics. What about the internal politics of Palestine? For decades, it was dominated by this man, Yasser Arafat. The Palestinian struggle was synonymous with him. Until he was alive, there was unity in the movement. But in 2004, Yasser Arafat died, and with his death, factionalism crept in. Today, Palestinian politics is a story of fragmented leadership. In the West Bank, you have the Fatah Party, founded by Arafat. They call the shots. In Gaza, it's the Hamas. You've probably heard a lot about them this last week. So tonight we want to tell you who they are and what they seek to achieve. What is the Hamas? It was founded in 1987, around the same time as the first Intifada or uprising. They were an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Unlike the Fatah, the Hamas has a military wing, and they're not shy of using it. Canada, the EU, the US, Israel and Japan are some of the countries that have listed the Hamas as a terror group. And some of their attacks have been classified as war crimes. But before their military adventurism, Hamas was actually a political success. They won the 2006 Palestinian election. They were set to dominate West Bank politics. And that's when the West stepped in. The powers of the Western world, that West. They made 2 key demands from Hamas. One was a commitment to non-violence, and the second was the recognition of Israel. Hamas refused both. You see, unlike the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization of Yasser Arafat, the Hamas does not recognize the state of Israel. They consider violence to be a legitimate tool of the movement. And thanks to this, foreign aid dwindled. Palestinian leaders grew uneasy. The split between Hamas and Fatah widened. In 2007, it reached a tipping point with the Battle of Gaza. This battle ended with Hamas taking over the Gaza Strip. And since then, they have ruled this Palestinian enclave, the Gaza Strip. And in these 14 years, their approach has not changed. The Hamas prefers rockets over diplomacy. So they make more headlines than the Fatah. But how representative are they? And don't be fooled by the Hamas's claims of selfless fighting. Their leaders are not even in Gaza. Most of them live in fancy hotels in Turkey, away from the war. They have their swimming pools and their country clubs, even private bodyguards, while people in Gaza live under rocket fire. Forbes listed Hamas as the 3rd richest terror group in the world, the 3rd richest. Their annual income was $700 million. So the answer is no. Hamas does not speak for all Palestinians. Most of them would prefer a peaceful solution to this conflict. But Hamas is dead set on military victories. And none of this is surprising. If you look at history, every movement has 2 factions, the moderates and the extremists. Hamas is the extremist group here. Their only claim to legitimacy is the fact that Israel is bombing them. But war cannot be the way forward, especially against a superior power like Israel. The little gains that Palestine has made have been through diplomacy. There have been none on the battlefield, none. So the picture of Hamas fighters resisting Israel is a romanticized reality. It makes for great headlines, yes, but nothing else. America is the most powerful military in the world. It can demonstrate authority in any part of the world, in any theater of war, whether it is land, the air, or the high seas. No one in the world can miss American deployments in foreign lands, but America has a secret and undercover army, an army of 60,000 soldiers, 60,000 officers, one that the world knows nothing about. A report claims that these shadow warriors are spread out across the world's biggest conflict zones from Pakistan to West Africa. Our next report tells you more about the Pentagon's secret army.
They are low profile. They operate under false identities and disguises, sometimes even behind enemy lines. A new report claims America has some 60,000 clandestine officers. This is the largest undercover force that the world has ever known. This secret army has been created by the US Department of Defense, better known as the Pentagon. Reports say this force is 10 times bigger than the number of the CIA's spies. They carry out domestic and foreign assignments, both in military uniforms and under civilian cover, hiding behind the facade of a private business or even a well-known company. No one knows who these officers are and exactly what they do, because America has never talked about this secret force. Unlike the rest of the American intelligence branches, this secret army hasn't been discussed by the US Congress at all. And the US government may want to keep it that way. But an American publication has managed to access some details. It says more than half of the secret army is engaged as special operations forces. They pursue terrorists in countries like Pakistan and West Africa. Some could even be deployed behind the borders of North Korea and Iran, two countries that are direct adversaries of America. The other wing is of military intelligence specialists. These are collectors, counterintelligence agents and linguists, deployed with a cover identity to protect them. This secret army also has a small but a growing cyber intelligence wing. Sitting behind their computers, they hunt for high-value targets using information in the public domain. They are also involved in influence campaigns on social media. All this may sound like the script of the next spy blockbuster. But if true, none of this should come as a surprise. America is said to have the most extensive and sophisticated intelligence network in the world. The question is this massive secret army even legal? Reports say such an initiative challenges America's domestic laws. It goes against the military code of conduct, not to mention the Geneva Convention of Human Rights. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Back in 2008, India's Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, the ONGC, discovered a massive gas field in Iran. It was called Farzad B, the perfect opportunity to boost Indian presence in Iran. But what happened next is a story of miscalculations. What appeared to be a done deal has slipped out of India's hands because Iran has chosen a local company over India. So where exactly did things go wrong? To answer this, we must go back to 2008. It was ONGC Videsh that first discovered this gas field. It sits at the depth of 20 and 90 meters, between 20 and 90 meters, on Iran's side of the Persian Gulf. How big is it? Farzad B holds almost 23 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves. 23 trillion. And 60% of this is recoverable. India was in the driver's seat to secure this project. ONGC offered $11 billion to develop this gas field. But the negotiations dragged on. The biggest problem was Western sanctions. During these negotiations, there were 3 changes in the White House, from Bush to Obama to Trump. Each president brought his own policy and sanctions, so a consistent line of negotiation was not possible. ONGC submitted a master development plan for this gas field. This was in 2011, almost 3 years after this discovery. The talks continued until 2012, but that's when President Obama approved a fresh round of sanctions on Iran. So the negotiations were discontinued. Almost 5 years later, India tried again. But by then, Donald Trump had arrived with his maximum pressure campaign, so the talks had to be shelved again. These attempts and proposals bled a lot of money, $400 million to be precise. So India discovered a lucrative gas block, and India sunk millions into it, only to be dropped from the project itself. Clearly, US sanctions are the biggest roadblock here, but Indian officials did miss a beat. They blamed Iran for the delay. In 2017, the Indian side's first offer was $4 billion. This was then scaled back to $3 billion. In Tehran, officials sat on this offer for quite some time, and India saw this as a lack of interest. So what did India do? The government asked Indian refiners to cut Iranian imports by a fifth. As expected, there was a reprisal from Tehran. They reduced the payment window for Indian refiners. They had 90 days before the import cut, but now they had only 60. At one point, it seemed like the government was okay with losing this asset. At least that's what Oil Minister Dharmendra Pradhan said in the year 2017. He said India would not mind if the asset was denied. In bilateral projects, such remarks can be deal breakers. So that's how India lost a golden opportunity in Iran. The contract has been given to the National Iranian Oil Company and its offshoot called Petropars. They will develop Farzad B for $1.7 billion. For India, this is becoming a template in Iran. Farzad B is not the first project to slip out of New Delhi's fingers. Remember the Chabahar railway line. Iran dropped India from the project and decided to go it alone. The same has happened with Farzad B. And these projects must be seen as part of the larger picture. In 2020, India-Iran bilateral trade dipped 80% in the first quarter, from $17 billion to just $3.5 billion. What does this say? The commercial links between the two countries are suffering, and this is not good news for India. Not just economically, but even strategically. Iran is India's key to Central Asia. It is the only way New Delhi can bypass Pakistan and reach Afghanistan and beyond. Once the US troops leave Afghanistan, this relationship becomes even more important. India will need Iran's help to smoothen any disturbances following the troop withdrawal. So what can India do here? First of all, secure its existing interests, mainly the Chabahar port. Iran's foreign minister recently said this port, the Chabahar port, was open for Chinese cooperation. He said that Chabahar is not against China or the Gwadar port in Pakistan. And this is a warning sign for India. It is time to loosen the purse strings, push on with Chabahar. Last month, we were told operations would start by May. We are halfway through the month of May, and there's no news from Chabahar. Right now, all of India's hopes are on the US-Iran thaw. If Joe Biden lifts the sanctions, business can return to normal. But the nuclear deal talks are painstakingly slow, so India cannot wait around for that to happen. Chabahar port is the last straw in India's Project Iran. Another misstep could see Indian interests bundled out of the Islamic Republic. It's a story we'll track for you. And before we move on to the next big global story, here's an issue that I really want to address and talk about tonight: the overreach of courts. Courts in India have been feeding the world with sensational headlines of late. Some of them sound straight out of page 3. An Indian court recently called rising death toll due to oxygen shortage a genocide. Another court went on to suggest that the country's election commission be booked for murder. Yesterday, a lower court slammed a state government for carelessness. It could have done so in parliamentary language. Instead, it chose to say that the state's medical infrastructure is Ram Bharose, meaning at the mercy of God. When was the last time you heard such statements coming out of courtrooms? It's another story that right now they're being cheered, mostly because they're seen echoing the sentiment of Indians suffering from vaccine shortage and a devastating second wave of the Wuhan virus. This is how people feel. All is not well in India, and that is true. There is anger, there is rising frustration, even resentment with the authorities. But is it a court's job to play to the gallery? Leave that to the political parties. The judiciary's job, as we understand, is to protect the law of the land, ensure separation of power, checks and balances, ensure that the executive and the legislature do not overstep their limits. But that's something Indian courts are now being accused of themselves, overstepping their limits. On the 12th of May, an Indian court decided to play moral police. It denied protection to a couple in a live-in relationship. Why? The court said, and I'm quoting, "If such protection is granted, the entire social fabric of the society would get disturbed." It went on to say that live-in relations are morally and socially not acceptable. Quick question. Is it a court's job to decide what is morally acceptable? No, it is not. Is it the court's job to decide what is socially acceptable? Again, it is not. What a court is supposed to do is decide what is legally acceptable, and legally speaking, Indians have the right to life. It is a fundamental right guaranteed by Article 21 of the Constitution of India. And it's the job of the court, any court in this country, to protect this right. Under no circumstance can it refuse to do this job, even if it goes against the morals of a judge. Criminality and morality are two different things. And as long as we are speaking law, I would also want to remind some judges that Indians have the right to privacy. Our relationships are private matters. These are spaces that judges cannot soiree into. While refusing to protect a live-in couple, the court said, and I quote again, "As a matter of fact, the petitioners in the garb of filing the present petition are seeking seal of approval on their live-in relationship, which is morally and socially not acceptable. I do not want to comment on how distasteful the statement is. Instead, I want to point out to every person watching this show tonight, young, old, single, in a relationship, whether you are a parent or a couple looking to move in together, live-in relationships have been upheld by the Supreme Court of India. As early as the year 2006, India's apex court said this. A woman is, and I'm quoting, "A woman is free to marry anyone she likes or live with anyone she likes." This was in a case called the Lata Singh versus State of Uttar Pradesh, 2006. Why am I citing this observation? Because in India, the decision of the apex court is binding on all lower courts. Again, I'm not the one saying this. The Supreme Court is on its website. Let me read out a Supreme Court judgment, and this one is from 2010. It says, "The acceptance of premarital sex and live-in relationships is viewed by some as an attack on the centrality of marriage. While there can be no doubt that in India marriage is an important social institution, we must also keep our minds open to the fact that there are certain individuals or groups who do not hold the same view." There is a reason why they say the law is blind. It is because the law is not supposed to be biased. Indian courts must move beyond lecturing people on morals. They must move beyond normalizing sexual offense by asking a victim to tie a rakhi to the accused. Courts cannot question the genuineness of rape allegations just because the survivor chose to drink with the accused. Courts cannot grant divorces because a woman does not believe in traditional markers like sindoor. Such judicial overreach is not welcome. Well, here is what is. Staying in tune with the times. High the standards, high the scrutiny. The exiled royal couple, Harry and Meghan, are learning this the hard way. With one tell-all interview, they became anti-racism crusaders. They revealed the racist undertones of British monarchy. But the couple themselves are guilty of it, it seems. Harry and Meghan have signed a multi-year deal with a company that makes skin whitening creams. Our next report has all the details.
You are what you endorse. This is the difficult reality that celebrities must accept. And if they don't, the internet will be happy to remind them. Just ask Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Last week they announced a new deal with Procter & Gamble, a multinational company that deals in consumer goods. Here's how the Sussexes describe their new partnership. Based on shared values, the partnership will focus on gender equality, more inclusive online spaces, and resilience and impact through sport. Wonderful thought, isn't it? Until you look at P&G's product lineup. They are the proud sellers of a skin lightening cream, also known as bottle racism. The company markets fair skin as a desirable trait. And this is the company Meghan and Prince Harry are proudly joining. The same Meghan who said this a few months back.
In those months when I was pregnant, all around this same time, so we have in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
As it turns out, Meghan has a very old connection to P&G. 28 years ago, she started a letter campaign against them.
You lie back.
11-year-old Meghan was furious at P&G's sexist ads.
This personal size of ivory soap makes them.
Especially this one, the ivory soap. It talked about American women fighting greasy pots and pans. Welcome to ad making in the 20th century. Meghan's letters had the intended effect. The company changed its slogan from American women to the people of America. She would later describe this episode after her marriage to Prince Harry. She said, and I quote, "Truth be told, at 11, I don't think I even knew what sexism meant. I just knew that something struck me internally that was telling me it was wrong," unquote. Cut to 2021. She's partnering with the same brand. And it's not like P&G has changed since the ivory soap. Racism and sexism are still very much marketing tools.
And
so who is the real Meghan?
Disproportionately affected by
the 11-year-old feminist, the mother enraged by racism, or the campaign partner of a company selling whitening products? Even a former P&G executive said this move sticks out like a sore thumb. The fact is, if you set high standards for yourself, you must be willing to uphold them. Royals, exiled royals. It doesn't matter. Hypocrisy is one size that fits all, much like racism. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.